Hi, my name is David DiPaola, and I'm the Managing Director for DiPaola Consulting. The talk I will be giving today is on the commercialization of emerging medical sensors for disruptive healthcare applications. Before I begin, I want to tell you a little bit about DiPaola Consulting. We focus on inspiration, design, and commercialization in sensors, MEMS nano, electromechanical products, and conservation. We play in a range of industries from medicine, transportation, heavy truck and off-road, industrial, consumer electronics, as well as defense. I'd like to start by giving you a background of what we're going to discuss. As I mentioned, I believe sensors in medicine will be disruptive. But design for commercialization is necessary in order to reach these goals. This webinar will evaluate the commercial readiness of two separate medical sensors currently under development and in the early stages of commercialization. We'll look at a number of factors, including the need, time to market, design for manufacturing quality, cost, all the way through marketing strategy. The first sensor we're going to talk about today is by Podometrics, the RTM system. This stands for Remote Temperature Monitoring System, and this is a scale-like device, but it doesn't measure weight, it actually measures temperature. And the system monitors the temperature differences between multiple locations on the same foot, as well as the temperature difference between your 2 feet. And this is used to detect a future diabetic foot ulcer before it occurs. The information from this system is actually processed in the cloud, and then they will either send you an alert via text, or you can log on to their app and get actionable information from your smart device. Let's look at the need for the RTM system. Diabetics are at risk of developing neuropathy or numbness in the extremities. And this can result in uneven foot pressure distribution and eventually ulcers. But ulcers can also develop on other parts of the foot. There are a couple very disturbing statistics here. Foot ulcers affect 3.6 million diabetics in the US alone. And when you look at the cost of diabetic foot care management and treatment, it runs $10.9 billion annually in the US alone. As you can see, there is an absolutely burning need in the marketplace for this system, and that's what you want to see when you develop a new product. The picture on the side here is of a foot ulcer that appears to be infected, and this was obtained from the Cleveland Clinic. Next, let's look at the time to market. Podometrics was formed in 2011, and they've been at it for a little over 8 years. In 2012, they got some grants and started to do some experimental testing and some prototypes. That led to their A-Series capital funding of $2.5 million. In 2015, they received a substantially equivalence designation from the FDA from a 510(k) filing, and they were granted their patent. They received another round of funding, and what is really interesting was in 2017, they had an article published in Diabetes Care, one of the highest ranked journals, and they saw a 97% prediction of foot ulcers 5 weeks prior to the occurrence. And this is really, really outstanding performance. I've showed this to a podiatrist I know, and they were really impressed. That leads us to the present, where they've raised another $13.9 million in scale-up capital. They got ISO certified. That's their quality certification. And they're beginning their production ramp. So one of the things I want you to take away from this is the benchmark for a substantially equivalent device from the FDA should be 3 to 5 years. And they've extended that by about 3 years. And the issue with that is that allows your competition to catch up. And there's a number of competitors that have just recently launched. And so you really want to focus on your timeline and try to get to market as quickly as possible. Next, let's talk about FDA approval. Podometrics filed a 510(k) pre-market notification with the FDA. The FDA then came back with a substantially equivalent determination and gave them a Class 1 rating. This is very significant because it means that they don't have to spend potentially years providing additional information in the way of clinical studies, validation, capability studies, and so forth. Instead, they can do what's called general controls, which is an annual registration. You list your device with the FDA. You have to have good manufacturing practices with a quality system, and you have to report any medical device related adverse events. You have to ensure that your device is properly labeled, and there are prohibitions against misbranding. Next, let's look at continuous versus intermittent monitoring. Continuous monitoring via health sensors has shown significant benefit, and the Apple Watch is a great example. The heart fall detection and the heart rate sensor have actually been credited with saving a number of lives. Intermittent monitoring can be equally effective, and there are some benefits. It can help with battery life, and it can help when you're trying to get someone to do a particular task. The RTM system has chosen once per day intermittent monitoring for 20 seconds, and it's proven very effective because they're able to detect a foot ulcer 5 weeks before the event. I think they've chosen the correct strategy. Another critical aspect of commercialization is design for manufacturing quality. We know that Podometrics brought their manufacturing partner into the game very late. So why can this potentially be a problem? Production variation can affect the performance of a sensor. And if you don't accommodate for that in the design, this can result in you having to change your design while you're in production or have yield loss. Both are extremely expensive. You also want to have your quality system developed early on, and we know that Podometrics received their ISO certification in 2019. Now, they may have done some of the development prior to their FDA certification, but again, this is fairly late. And when you're looking at, for example, testing a product in production, have you built in the proper test vehicles to make those tests? For example, do you have pads that a production machine can come down and touch so that they can run a test? If you haven't, again, this results in a design change. They also had several changes in their product system after clinical trials. This puts you at risk of introducing a new variable that potentially changes performance or can introduce a quality problem. We recommend at Mansef to get to your final production design as soon as possible. To illustrate this point, look at the two examples below. One is from 2017, and one is what appears to be their production intent design. You can see that the package envelope has changed, as well as the light indicator on the center of the product. That signifies it's being used. There could be a number of other changes inside that we're not aware of. You also want to look for any components that can be combined for added simplicity and reduced part count. Let's take a look at a few examples. If you look at items 42, 22, and 24, the edge for aesthetics, rigid base, and non-skid base, those three components could actually be combined into one and can actually be used as a battery holder as well. So you eliminate 4 components and make one component. The other thing you could do is you could take the motherboard and combine it with the printed circuit board that holds the temperature sensors. So now you've reduced a component count of 8 down to 4. This really simplifies component management. Next, let's look at software integration and user interface. These are critical areas because if a user finds that your device is cumbersome or complex, they will not use it, and your sales will dwindle immediately once word gets out. I think the RTM system does a pretty good job in this regard. They automatically connect to the cloud and send all of their data to the cloud for analysis to prevent the user from having to do that analysis. And that's what actually caused a previous generation of this device by another company to actually fail, because people had to actually do some of the data manipulation. So in this particular case, the RTM system does it all for the patient. That's great. They can also send you an alert via text if there's an issue. These two characteristics alone have resulted in a very high adherence rate to actually using the system during clinical studies. And 88% of the people thought it was easy to use. So one of the ways that I think this system can be improved is when I look at the screen that's currently in the presentation, it's not immediately clear to me that there's an issue. And I believe the first screen that a person sees needs to very quickly alert them with minimal words if there is an issue or not and what action they need to take. The other thing I think they should implement is voice. Can Siri help? For example, all they do is they press the button and say, Siri, can you get me the data from my RTM system? And Siri gives you a complete summary of what it is you need to know. We already spoke quite a bit about performance, so I want to move on to cost. Currently, there's no cost information available. However, here are a couple questions that maybe you can consider. When thinking about cost for a medical device, one of the things I like to understand is, what would an insurance company pay to have this in every person's home who is at risk? Another thing that you can consider is direct to consumer. And what would a consumer pay who is in the at-risk group? I know that if I was at risk, I would really want this device. And some form of marketing study to understand what someone would pay would be very valuable, especially when you're designing the device. When commercializing a medical product, I like to look at the core technology building block and seeing how I can then make derivatives from that to drive future business growth. Let's look at an example with the RTM system. They have excellent data collection hardware and wireless communication that could be applied to an alternative medical device. They can apply their software analytics or their user interface in a slightly modified fashion for another product. Could they add a pressure sensor to their RTM system and have a better detection of Charcot's foot? These are just some examples of ways that they could apply their core technology to other products. I also want to look at marketing strategy. And we know that they added a senior sales executive in 2019. But we at Mansef like to look at marketing a little bit different. It's so critical to build brand and build your customer base even before you're in production. And I believe they would have been better served starting much earlier, ensuring that every single podiatrist in the country and in Europe and Asia knew about this and would be ready for it when it was delivered to market. I next want to look at the saliva glucose biosensor by GBS. This is the first non-invasive saliva-based glucose test that truly eliminates the pinprick of the finger. Again, burning need in the marketplace for this product. And it's really quite simple. You place the saliva sensor in your mouth. You mix it with the saliva. You then bring it close to your phone, and all of the data is present for you. I'd now like to contrast the saliva glucose biosensor with the RTM system. What GBS did differently was they put manufacturing at the forefront. They first proved proof of principle with the prototype, but then quickly moved to what they could do in hundreds of millions of units per year. And that was a printing process, reel to reel, using inkjets. They printed an organic thin film transistor with an enzymic glucose sensor on board, and were able to develop that such that it could detect glucose, which is 1/100th of a quantity lower in saliva than it is in blood. And this is really significant because now all of the testing that they do will be off a production process. So they have very little to worry about if their production process is going to cause new variables that have to be a concern later in the game. They've done this all up front, and this is really the benchmark for how medical sensors should be developed. You really have to consider manufacturing, quality, and commercialization up front when you develop your sensor. The other positive aspect of the saliva glucose biosensor is that it's a true platform technology. This can be adapted to detect a variety of substances, so they can actually detect things such as cancer, heart disease, or allergies. And they're currently developing that technology so that they can scale derivatives once they launch the glucose sensor. The one thing that this company needs to be careful of, though, is project creep and defocus, because this can drain capital and delay your timeline. And one thing that we know is that the benchmark for this type of product is 3 to 5 years, and they're already 6 years in with no clear path from what we can tell to regulatory approval and full commercialization. So let's review some conclusions from this talk. What we saw is a great technical product alone is not enough to successfully launch at scale. You really need to consider design for commercialization. You also have to have a very clear plan of your timeline, and competitors will take advantage of your missteps, and investors get impatient. Manufacturing and quality should be considered at the start and developed in parallel with your core technology. This prevents performance issues and quality issues that are extremely expensive in production to solve. Ensure that software integration and user interface maximize ease of use and add value to your customer. Building your market and brand needs equal resources to technology development. Do not think of marketing as an afterthought. It really needs to be considered up front. And use these lessons to assess your own product so that you can step on the shoulders of giants and really optimize your chance of success. If you'd like to learn more about these topics, I will be presenting at Sensors Summit 2019 in San Diego in December as part of a group for Mansef talking about these very topics. And you can also consider coming to our comms event in the fall of 2020, and more information will be available coming shortly. Thank you.